Good evening. Come in, everybody. Thank you. Good evening. Good evening. Good evening, Councillor Martin. Before we start, I'd just like to outline some of the house rules. There are no planned fire alarms, so if the sound does go off, you've got to go out through the emergency exit. Do we all know where they are, or do you want me to do the? Oh. Do you all know where the emergency exits are, or do you want me to do the thing? Right, okay. And can I request that all mobile phones are kept silent and switched off? Thank you. Members of the committee are attending in person here at the Civic Centre, and we may have other members of the council dialed into the meeting via Microsoft Teams to observe or to participate in the meeting. Only members of the committee present at the Civic Centre are entitled to vote. Please note that this meeting is recorded and live streamed on YouTube. The web link for this is displayed on the agenda for the meeting, which can be found on the council's website. Members on Teams are asked to keep their microphones on mute and only unmute when they wish to speak. And can I remind members to unmute themselves once they've finished speaking to enable the meeting to proceed smoothly. Right, those are the housekeeping rules. Okay. Apologies. Have we got any apologies?
Yes, Chair, we've had apologies from councillors Paul Wharton-Hardman and Hilary Bedford. We also have apologies from councillor Julie Butterick with councillor Watson in attendance for this evening. Right,
thank you. Thank you. Have we got any declarations of interest? This is a moment to indicate if you've got any declarations of interest, members of the committee. Right, thank you. I have the minutes of the last meeting of Licensing and Public Safety Committee held on the 27th of June in front of me for approval. Are there any inaccuracies in the meeting, and can we propose the minutes for approval? We're happy with all that. Shall I sign them? Can we just have a formal vote? Can we have a formal vote, please? Can we have a formal vote? 1, 2. Yep. Thank you.
Thank you.
Do you want me to sign them now, or do them at the end? Right. Okay. And I have the minutes of the last meeting of the general subcommittee that was held on the 20th of June. Have we got a proposer for these, or are you happy for me to propose these are accurate?
Propose those,
yes. And what about a seconder? Yep, fine. Can we confirm that these are approved? Can we have a show of hands? Thank you. Sign those later. Okay. And the minutes of the licensing panel. Now we have several minutes of licensing panels to approve, and we'll work through them in date order. Are there any points of accuracy on the meeting held on the 25th of July at 2 p.m? Can we propose the minutes for approval on the panel were myself, Councillor Wharton-Hardman and Councillor Bedford. Now, as there's only me here, and the others are not, yeah, I can remember what happened, so you're all happy with me to sign them, thank you. Right, and then the next one is for the 25th of July at 5 p.m. Can we propose that the minutes for approval, and on that panel with myself, Councillor Wharton-Hardman and Councillor Hancock. Right, so are we happy with that? We're happy with that, okay, thank you. And points of accuracy again on the 1st of August, and these can be found in the supplementary agenda. And on the panel was Councillor Wharton-Hardman, Councillor Gabbett and Councillor Stevens. So that would be in your ball. The ball is in your court. Are you happy with that? They're happy.
I'll second the chair.
That was the one with the Warriors one, wasn't it? If I remember rightly, yeah. Okay. Thank you. Right, moving on to Hackney and private hire vehicle age policy update. Members are advised that this report can be found on page 27 and it goes on for a fortnight. And I'm now going to invite Chris Ward to present the item. Sorry, I couldn't resist that. Couldn't resist that. And I presume we've all read it because there will be a questionnaire at the end. Sorry. And it says here, the chair to manage the debate invited members to speak in order as needed. Thank you, Chris. Can you do
Thanks, Chair. I'll just share my screen because I've got a PowerPoint for you to talk you through all of those pages. A moment.
Sorry, Chris. That's as useful as a...
There we go. Is that better? The report is regarding the vehicle age policy and the licensing of Hackney carriage vehicles. At the meeting of the Licensing and Public Safety Committee in April 2022, members passed a new vehicle age policy and a policy that restricted the number of non-wheelchair accessible Hackney carriage vehicles. The new age policy was designed to give emphasis to the emissions ratings of vehicles that were licensed, and the updated policy restricting the number of Hackney carriage vehicles would make sure the council had a diverse balance of wheelchair and non-wheelchair accessible vehicles. Members agreed that both policies would be recommended for the next meeting of the full council for adoption, with the policy being formally reviewed for 2025. Members agreed the new policy wording, which would allow new vehicles with an emission rating of less than Euro 6 to be licensed up to 4 years and then stay licensed up to 8 years. And new vehicles with an emission rating of Euro 6 would be licensed up to 6 years old, and then it could stay licensed up to 12 years old. This would give an incentive to the trade so they could license a vehicle for longer, providing it was Euro 6 compliant. Licensing vehicles with lower CO2 levels would help create a fleet of lower polluting vehicles, and this would help the authority to meet the Clean Air Zone commitments. We also agreed on an exemption for all special needs transports vehicles to be exempt, so they could be up to 12 years old if they were below the rating of Euro 6. Members agreed to a new policy to cap the number of non-wheelchair accessible vehicles licensed with the authority to 100 vehicles, changing the old grandfather rights policy to a new cap policy. The old policy at that point stated the decision would be reviewed in 2019 when the council will consider whether there's still a balance of vehicles for all taxi users, and thus the authority is complying with its equality duty. The council will consider whether there's still a balance of vehicles for all taxi users, and thus if the authority is complying with its equality duty. Since 2015, wheelchair accessible vehicles have been accepted on the Hackney carriage vehicles only. And we're looking to accommodate additional non-wheelchair accessible vehicles up to 100. Although the policies were passed until 2025, members also asked for an update after 12 months to report back on the availability to drivers for the electric and hybrid vehicles, if the policy is working as an incentive to buy low polluting vehicles, and the compliance with our equality duties with regard to the availability of wheelchair accessible vehicles. So this report contains our feedback as officers following the policies being in place for the last 15 months or so, but we do have a proposal for a small amendment. The report on the 6th of the 4th, 2022 explained to members there was nothing within the policy at the time that promoted an incentive to drivers to choose more efficient, less polluting vehicles. But we can now report that all new vehicles licensed with the new policy implemented last year have been Euro 6 rated vehicles, with the exception of some larger vehicles licensed as special need transport vehicles as per the policy rating, but they've all been Euro 5 rating. They've basically been adapted transit vehicles to meet the needs of special need children. Prior to the policy being introduced in June 2022, the fleet of vehicles licensed by South Ribble only had 10 hybrid vehicles. But since June 22, in the last 15 months, we've seen this increase by another 16 hybrid vehicles. Vehicle proprietors are obviously seeing the incentives of buying hybrid low polluted vehicles, which can stay on the policy longer until 12 years old. Current position, feedback September 2023. So the council needs to keep a balance of wheelchair accessible vehicles, named as WAVs, and non-wheelchair accessible vehicles available for its residents. Capping the number of non-wheelchair accessible vehicles keeps wheelchair accessible vehicles available to our passengers. As the council does not cap the total number of Hackney carriage vehicles licensed, any new Hackney carriage presented to officers would require to be one of the WAVs after the cap has been reached. To make sure we're compliant with our equality duties, the council commissioned an unmet demand survey, which is the attached document, which is obviously 90 odd pages long as Appendix 1. The report looks as if there's any significant unmet demand in South Ribble for our residents as passengers. But the report found there's no unmet demand for licensed vehicles in South Ribble, and also the percentage of vehicles of WAVs is compliant with the recommendations of the Department for Transport. So does the policy fall in line with the Equalities Act 2010? the council still has a duty to make public a list of wheelchair accessible vehicles designated for the purpose of the Section 165 of the Equalities Act. Still needs to make sure adequate vehicles are available to our wheelchair-bound passengers. Section 165 of the Equalities Act imposes duties upon drivers of designated vehicles dealing with disabled passengers travelling in wheelchairs, or as a person who wishes to accompany the person within the wheelchair. Those duties are to carry the passengers whilst in the wheelchair, not to make any additional charge for doing so. If the person chooses to sit in the passenger seat to carry the wheelchair, to take such steps as are reasonably necessary to ensure the passengers is carried safely, with reasonable comfort, and to give passengers such mobility assistance as reasonably required. So the current position on electric vehicles, has there been any change since last year when we adopted the policy? So at the meeting on the 6th of the 4th, 2022, officers reported when researching the market for hybrid electric type vehicles, the only cost-effective options at that point were drivers of non-wheelchair accessible vehicles. We've seen this over the last 12 months with 16 new hybrids which have been added. But officers again have researched the cost of availability for fit-for-purpose electric vehicles. And to be honest, we haven't found anything that is fit for purpose at the moment. So we'll come to that in a moment on the PowerPoint. So although some second-hand vehicles have been found at a lower expense, fit-for-purpose vehicles are still seen as being out of the price range for drivers, especially electric wheelchair vehicles, which are wheelchair accessible vehicles. Officers found that cheaper vehicles have poor ranges with only 200 miles. They're not capable of performing the required number of miles in one charge, potentially leaving electric vehicles either sat charging or waiting to be charged during peak times, leaving an unmet demand for our passengers. So availability of electric and WAV vehicles again. So I've just got some examples. They're appendixed into the report, but we've got two Mercedes VTOL vehicles there, which are quite popular with drivers of MPVs and wheelchair accessible vehicles. Obviously, both those vehicles are way out of price for our taxi drivers, one being 60,000 and one being nearly 66,000. Also on those, one of those vehicles still hasn't got that big of a range. It's only 200 and odd miles. So we also found some older electric type vehicles. So we found one that would just be compliant with the policy being 2017. But if you look at the range on that vehicle, it's only 106. So it's not fit for purpose to be a taxi. Those miles would be eaten up in the space of a couple of hours. A more cheaper, newish vehicle there that's electric, so a Vauxhall Vivaro Life. The range is still not fit for purpose on that one, and that's still a 2022 vehicle, and it's only got a range of 137 miles. So the actual range on vehicles, unless they're looking at very expensive vehicles, just isn't there at the moment. And again, Citroen Berlingo, which is what we see as adapted wheelchair vehicles, if it's not an MPV, there's one there for 25,500, and the range again is only 174 miles. So at the moment, the vehicles that are available as wheelchair accessible vehicles to our drivers are just simply not fit for purpose. Regarding charging points, the current infrastructure for charging points within South Bribble would not be capable to accommodate the number of vehicles if the council was to change to an electricity-only policy. Currently, if the council was to change to an electric-only policy, vehicles wouldn't be able to charge quick enough to accommodate the demand from residents. And again, we'd have vehicles either sat on the side of the road or they'd be sat charging while there'd be an unmet demand to our residents. So problems found with the current policy wording. So the new policy wording is working. We're seeing an increase of low-polluting hybrid vehicles coming onto the fleet, which is lowering the CO2 levels, helping to create a fleet of low-polluting vehicles, a step towards the council's aspirations to be net carbon zero by 2030. Obviously, giving drivers an incentive for margin for vehicle ages, drivers are finding it more affordable to purchase hybrid-type vehicles with less restrictions on ages, as a previous policy up to 2022 last year would only allow those saloon-type vehicles on for 4 years, whereas now they allow them on up to 6 years. But officers report there's 11 vehicles that haven't been changed by drivers. These are all either MPVs, WAVs, or WAVs in their own right. So MPV is a multi-purpose vehicle which have been converted into a wheelchair accessible vehicle. These were on the policy before the policy came into effect being older than 12 years because the old policy used to just allow wheelchair accessible vehicles until 12 years of age. The 11 vehicles are all Euro 5 rated. They're either transit or van type wheelchair accessible vehicles. These vehicles have been licensed by the authority for some time and were older than 8 years when the policy was introduced last year. Type of vehicles are not normally adapted for wheelchair accessible. The small converted vans or MPVs, which are manufactured, have taken longer to implement low CO2 rated engines, obviously Euro 6. And they don't use the same engines in the vans as they do in actual cars. And the cost of purchasing these types of vehicles are excessively more than saloon type non-WAV vehicles, as we've just seen in the previous slides with the pictures. So unmet demand for wheelchair users. Officers are concerned that should we enforce these 11 vehicles that are not policy compliant, no longer being licensed by the authority, we'll see an unmet demand for wheelchair accessible taxis within our area for our wheelchair bound passengers. The council has a duty to licence wheelchair accessible vehicles and keep a list of vehicles advertised to the general public, so there's no unmet demand for vehicles by our wheelchair bound passengers. So in other areas, exemptions from ULEZ zones for these types of vehicles. So the problem's been identified by the Transport for London within its ultra low emission zone ULEZ. Wheelchair accessible vehicles have been given a grace period now with an exemption from paying the ULEZ charges until the 24th of October 2027 by the Transport for London, where they don't meet the current Euro ratings for free transport within the City of London. So the officer proposal. So after seeing the policy in place for 18 months, the current policy, like I say, is working. It's created an incentive for drivers to obtain lower polluting vehicles. The recommendation to members is to make a minor amendment to the policy wording to include the wheelchair accessible vehicles and multi-purpose vehicles that are not Euro 6 compliant to add into the exemption for the policy and to be licensed up to 12 years of age. This would only be relevant for the remaining 11 WAV vehicles, as mentioned previously in the report, that are not compliant. The equality duty on the council to provide the diverse fleet of vehicles for our residents is just as important as working towards the council's objectives for air quality. For that reason, the remaining WAVs and MPVs, as mentioned, should remain on the fleet until 12 years or until the drivers have chose to replace them. So the imposed policy wording can be found attached to the report as Appendix 3. Members are now invited to consider the proposed changes to the vehicle age policy wording recommendations by officers, to agree that officers should undertake another consultation exercise with our stakeholders on the proposed changes, and then to receive a report back on the consultation exercise at a future meeting with then a proposal to take that to full council. Thank you.
Good. Make copious notes, I hope. Right, anybody got any questions for Chris? Go on.
It's not about the policy itself. I'm just curious, do we know how long these electric vehicles last? I know a diesel vehicle, you can go 100, 200,000 miles, but what's the lifetime of these of electric vehicles? What I want to get to by the question is, how are they disposed of? And does South Ribble have any facilities for disposing of electric vehicles?
We've no facilities to dispose of them at the moment. I guess with vehicles being new, it's unknown, isn't it, how long these vehicles will last for at the moment. So that is a concern for the drivers as well, having to spend all that money on one of those types of vehicle and it not last as long as a petrol or diesel vehicle would. Yeah.
I think the majority of manufacturers are only giving warranties of 10 years on their vehicles, particularly like Teslas, etc. These new vehicles are only giving you 10 years life on the battery. So whether that'll change in the future, we don't know.
I think, again, with that point, we're not actually looking at saloon-type vehicles either. We're looking at wheelchair-accessible vehicles that seem to be behind with the technology than you likes Tesla and companies like that are providing the saloon-type vehicles.
Technology. Any more questions anybody want to ask? Yes, Peter.
Thanks, Chair. It wasn't really a question. As we said, I don't see any issues with the report and happy to propose that we go ahead with the recommendations. But I just thought it was worth noting that when we brought in the policy a year ago, it does seem to work. So it was a good idea. And I think it's good work from the officers.
I mean, I know I did say it lasted a fortnight, that report, but actually it's an excellent report. And when you go through it, it dots all the I's, crosses the T's, and it's absolutely spot on information that we need to make any decision. So thanks for that, Chris. It really is a very good report. And Peter has just proposed that we adopt the recommendations as per se. I will second that. I think that's what we should be doing. So the recommendations are that we note the report, which we can vote on. It's not that's not a vote, but we can note the report. Thank you. Consider the proposals to change the vehicle age and in the word. It's a wording that needs changing by officers. That's right, isn't it? There we go. So are we happy to do that? We'll vote on that in a minute. To agree that the officers should undertake a consultation exercise with stakeholders about the proposed changes, and to agree to receive a report on the outcome of the consultation exercise at a future meeting. So that's what we're looking at. We're happy with that. You're happy with that? I've got that. So shall we vote on do we want to vote on them separately, or shall we vote on them all together? All together. Yes, you can come in. Of course you can.
Sorry, just for clarification purposes, Chair. The actual vote, so just so members are aware, is in respect of agreeing that officers should undertake a consultation exercise with stakeholders on the proposed changes, and to agree to receive a report on the outcome of the consultation exercise at a future meeting. So that's what you're voting on. Okay. So.
Right. So, anybody in favour? Are we all in favour or not? You'll put your hand up and be counted. Right. That looks unanimous to me. Thank you.
So, Chair, thank you.
Thank you.
That item has been agreed, and members have unanimously agreed to for officers to undertake consultation exercise and for the report to come back to a full future committee afterwards. Thank you.
Just to clarify, I'm writing, I shouldn't presume anything, that all taxi drivers will be contacted by letter. So, because we've got all their contact details, so it will go out by letter and hopefully they will reply. Am I right in thinking it's about 240?
Yeah, we did. We've put them all through mandatory CSE training. We did a data cleanse part of that exercise. We've got new email addresses for every driver, so we're going to do it via email this time, obviously, to save paper and hopefully some time for us as well.
Oh, all right. Thank you. That sounds efficient. Item 7, which is the cafe pavement licensing review, if you will, so whatever you want to call it. Members are advised that the report can be found on page 111. I'm going to invite Chris Ward to present this item. Again, this is quite a long article to read, article, report, whatever, to read. So, Chris, would you like to take us through it?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. So the Business and Planning Act 2020 was first obtained royal assent on 22nd of July 2020. The Act introduced several powers and requirements on local authorities that affect how they deal with various issues, with the aim of supporting local businesses, helping economic recovery following the COVID-19 crisis. The Act introduced temporary fast-track processes for businesses to obtain permission in the form of a payment licence from the local authority for the placement of furniture such as tables and chairs on the pavement outside of the premises, which will enable them to maximise their capacity in adhering to social distancing guidelines. Any businesses selling or serving food or drink, not just alcohol licensed premises, may apply for a payment licence to have tables and chairs and street furniture placed on the highway adjacent to their premises and benefit for their customers. Each year since the Act came into force, the government have decided to extend the legislation for another 12 months. And again, this has been extended for another 12 months until the 30th of September 2024. It's recommended that the Council confirms to retain the same fee of £100 for each new payment licence or renewal of payment licence, which is in line with the maximum amount specified by government. The policy and application form have been updated to reflect the extension to the payment licences until the 30th of September 2024, and they can be found attached to the report as Appendix 1 and 2 respectively. Members are asked to extend the policy for the cafe payment licensing scheme for a further year until September 2024, in line with the Business and Planning Act 2020, Payment Licences Coronavirus Amendment Regulations 2023. Members agreed to extend the payment cafe licensing issued by the licensing authority. Then a report will be taken to the next committee meeting of the full council for full approval on the 20th of the 9th, 2023. Thank you, Chair.
Right. Recommendations then. Has anybody got any questions for Chris? No? Happy with what's been said? Basically, it's to just continue it. Yes.
How many licenses do we have at the moment? Do we know? Is there a big take up on it, or?
Off the top of my head, I think we've got about 6. I think I'm right, Justin? Yeah, around 6. Yeah. Yeah. There's obviously conditions they have to abide to, so there's distances of 3 metres for safe passage and things like that. And if it's certain distances from the road, the highways could object as a responsible authority, and they'd have to pass all those conditions before we could grant the licence. And obviously, depending on certain circumstances, certain venues, we could put different conditions onto that are appropriate to that sort of circumstance there.
So, just to clarify, there are some properties that were domestic properties and had a garden area in front, which have now become commercial, and they've been using that garden area, if you will, as their outdoor space. So they don't need a licence because it's their own property, if you will. Is that?
Yeah, it's where it's on the highway. So if it's on private land, they wouldn't need a payment licence for that. It's just use of the actual highway.
Right. Oh, thanks for that clarification, because there are a number of properties like that in Leyland, out there on Huff Lane, and there's certainly more than 6. So I just wanted to clarify that. So these are right. Thank you very much. Anybody else want to clarify? Yes, carry.
Yeah, and have there been any issues from the 6 at all, or has it all been perfectly okay?
No, we've not had any issues really. There's been no crime and disorder issues. We've not had any issues of accidents or anything like that. So we've not had anything reported in the past. All applications go to all the responsible authorities. So if we did foresee any issues, we'd condition those into the licences. So it's worked quite well so far. So it did used to be run by the Highways Authority, but since 2020, with the corona regs coming in, it's been passed over to the local authority to regulate. So I think the government is still deciding which way forward they're going to go with it. So at the moment, they just keep extending it for 12 months, which is where we've been for the last 2 or 3 years.
Councillor Martin, do you want to say anything? You usually do.
Thank you, Chair. I've spoken on this before in support of it, and obviously with what you just mentioned about gardens being used, as obviously Penwortham has that same thing. I like to see this policy continue indefinitely, simply because what happens at the moment is that you have people with gardens which they use for their business, whereas if there's areas that they haven't got that, then they're disadvantaged. And I can only assume, I know that we only have 6, but if there is an uptake on that, what you could see happening is businesses being enveloped if they've got one either side. So that's the other thing. I did have a quick look at the policy, and I imagine there is provision for it. But if people are putting furniture on the highway, there must be. Is there a part of that says they must maintain their fire exits and things, and other people, because obviously it's quite. I mean, we've seen it in Penwortham Live where people are quite enthusiastic with the revelations that are going on and the revelry, and they tend to sort of obscure some of the exits and things like that. So does the policy cover the sort of the exit of vehicle of businesses in the event of emergency, especially, and probably more the business that's got the extension anyway? So that's all. But I'm supportive of this, and if it can be fed back that we'd like to see it carry on, then I would like to. Cheers.
Yeah, within the conditions, there's 3 metres for safe passage, so we would see that cover that, but each licence would be tailored to each individual circumstance. So if there was fire exit reasons, yeah, we'd look at that under that sort of. There would need to be safe passage for customers to leave the premises. Like I say, we've seen it before on nights when you've been out with us. So yeah, we would see that an issue if it was blocking access, and we would look at that 3 metres to be added into the premises as well to make sure there was fire exits as well. Yeah.
Thanks, Chris. Anybody else? Yes, carry on, James.
Will the licenses be automatically reissued with an invoice, or do they have to apply again, or is it just?
Yeah, so after the 30th of September this year, they'll cease to exist, so they have to reapply completely for a new one after that. Yeah. Yeah, we can write out to them, but yeah, they're aware. They've all reapplied each year, so they're fully aware it's got an end date on their actual licence. We've already had at least one of them write to us so far. They're already after it already, so yeah.
But we're not making a fortune if there's only 6 of them, is it? We're only making 600 quid. So is that's renewable annually? That licence? Yeah, at the moment. Right. Okay. Thank you. So happy with that? Anybody else okay? Conor, you want to say anything? No, you're okay with it, Paul? Everybody? Right. Right. Let's have a look at the recommendations then. So we need to note the changes to the Business and Planning Act of 2020, introduced by the Business and Planning Act, pavement licences, courier virus amendment regulations. It goes on forever. It's subsection 3, paragraph 4, by the way. To agree to extend the proposed duration of the granting of the pavement licence until the 30th of September 2024, as per the Business and Planning Act 2020. To confirm the level of fee charged in respect of the applications for pavement licences issued under the Business and Planning Act 2020. To extend delegated authority to officers as described at paragraph 21 of the report. If members are minded to accept the recommendations of officers, then to forward this report to the next meeting of the council with a recommendation for formal adoption of the proposed policy. So we need to vote on extend to the duration of the granting of the pavement licences, the level of fee, to extend the delegation of authority to the officers, and to take it to council. So that's what we're voting on. Okay. I can't see I haven't got any problems with any of that, but yeah.
Can I propose that we accept the recommendations of the officers, and that this report is forwarded to the next meeting of the full council with the recommendations for the formal adoption of the proposed policy.
Right. Anybody want to second that? Right. Thank you. Right. Shall we call to vote, please? Anybody against? No, I think that's you.
Thank you.
That's lovely. Thank you. Oh, I thought I was going to go on a lot longer than that tonight, did you, when you saw that paperwork? Through to council on... That's next week. That's next week, isn't it? 20th next week, isn't it? Yeah, so that goes through next week. So, yeah. Yeah. So get it on that'll be quick. It doesn't usually anything goes through as quickly as that. So that'll be brilliant. So there we are. That's the business is concluded, I think. I think we're up to speed. Just let me just check my notes and find out. No, that's it. Thank you very much for attending, and you can all go